The world is silent. The world continues to be silent with over 50,000 Syrians killed. 50,000 plus dead. No one asked why. 50,000 plus dead and nobody cares. But Syrians care, and they will continue to struggle and protest and demand freedom no matter how many lives have been lost.
So the question is, where was I when the revolution basically began in Syria in March of 2011? I was like everybody else. I was just doing my own thing, and I heard that what was happening in Syria was happening, but I didn't pay a lot of attention. And it took me actually a few months to catch on to what was happening and to understand how big and huge it was, because the revolution in Syria began when a couple of teenagers, just some school kids actually, they were some boys, they were 12, 13 years old. They wrote some graffiti on the wall of their school building saying, you know, we want the regime to go. And then what happened was, within that evening of when they had written that graffiti, they all got captured and detained by the secret police in Syria, and they got severely tortured, and most of them were returned, you know, mutilated and dead to their families' houses 1 week later. This is how the revolution began. Just because some schoolboys, they wrote some graffiti on the wall. And when they got detained, you know, that evening, within, I don't know how quickly, within a couple of days or the next day, some men in their 20s, they were in that town, they said this is too much, and then they began doing demonstrations and rallies. And before that, there had been no demonstrations in Syria, and it was not heard of at all, actually. So I was just here doing my own thing, and then I began to understand what was happening, how big it was actually for Syrians, not only for the boys to do graffiti, but for Syrians to say, you know, we want to do demonstrations, we want to rally peacefully, we want to show that we are not, you know, we are against the regime, and this was unheard of. So that was a big thing, and it took a while for me to really understand that that was happening. I was born and raised in Denmark. My father is Syrian, my mother is Danish, but I was born and raised in Denmark. I've always felt like the whole world basically is our playground, but I did not have a specific affiliation to any country except the country I was born and raised in, which was Denmark. I grew up like any other Danish child in Denmark. Denmark is a Christian country, but nobody really practices Christianity. My parents divorced, so I moved to an apartment where you had tons of people from different minorities. There were many Indian families. I had some Indian friends, some Turkish friends, but basically I would go to school and be with all Danish people, just like any other kid in Denmark, basically. I have lived outside of Denmark since I was 19, and it's only been until the last maybe 5 years that I've begun not feeling so Danish. I guess now I would describe myself as an American Syrian, but I do consider myself Danish. You get a mixed personality, but it can still work very well. I feel more Syrian because my children, they are 3/4 Syrian, and while they speak Danish, then as Muslims they will be marked not as Danish but as Syrians. So then that means that they need to also have a strong identity as Syrians and be proud of whom they are, since people are going to look at them not as if they were Danish or with the Danish culture that they have, but they will be immediately judged as Muslims and Arabs, basically. When and why did I start going to Syria? Well, I went to Syria as a child, maybe one time, and when I became a teenager, most of the summers I would go there for a month or something like that, 4 to 6 weeks, to visit family, I guess. One of the most special moments I had was the very first time I was fasting, actually, was in Syria, and I had been wanting, I think it was a piece of watermelon or something the whole day. And my mother-in-law had kept it for me in the refrigerator. So, you know, you break the fast, it's like 10 o'clock in the evening, and by then, you know, you go there and there's a piece of watermelon waiting for you. So that was a pretty happy moment. Just the way that people in Syria, they really care, you know. I mean, can't say the people of Syria, but the people I've met in Syria, they've always been caring people. They don't think about themselves before they think of others. They do think of others before they think of themselves. Nobody would take the last piece of watermelon if it was meant for somebody else, basically. There's just a lot of generosity and openness and love there. The question is, when was the moment when I really felt that I had to do something and make a difference for what was happening in Syria? It built up a little bit. There had been some build up, you know. When I began realizing the way the revolution began, it was just some boys who went out, wrote some graffiti, and when I saw what happened to the boy, one boy in particular, his name is Hamza al-Khatib, you know, the mutilated body, how he was returned to his family. Those pictures, they just stayed in my mind, you know. And how people, they just went out rallying, they were just rallying every Friday, and in return, you know, they were met with machine guns. So at one point, it was around in March, there was a young kid, he was like, you know, a 20-year-old young kid, half Syrian, half British. His name is Nadia Alawa. He was one of the many citizen reporters or citizen journalists who had been taking pictures and putting it on you know, like documented basically, you know, with videotaping what was going on inside of Syria and putting it on YouTube. So because of his English skills, he had been talking while his friends had been, you know, filming. So he was coming here for a visit, and I was like, oh boy, you know, this kid, you know, he could easily have chosen to stay in England and live, you know, in safety, but instead he would go inside of Syria and risk his life because he just felt that there was something he had to do. That made an impression on me, basically, and around that time, that was when I said, you know, there's something I can do, and, you know, I just had to figure out what it is. The time when I began getting involved was when Nadia Alawa, he was visiting here in March, and I decided that he should come here to Boston and visit. So I spent 2 days, literally day and night, you know, working and getting him here to Boston, and we set up an event at Harvard where he was speaking, and we had like a small fundraiser with Karen Foundation that helps orphans. We had a panel discussion. You know, all of that was set up within a couple of days.
Ramadan came twice. People were sad instead of being happy. People were sad.
She's so angry with me.
Christmas.
See, that's what I get.
Christmas is coming. The people of Syria are not happy. On the Christmas tree here, we have the pictures of Syrian children of detainees who have been in prison for months, being tortured on a daily basis. Some of them, sadly, could be dead by now. We don't know. This is the fate of Syrians today. This is what we're struggling against a tyrant regime that does not distinguish between old and young, child, adult, male, female, Muslim, Christian, Alawi, Sunni, Arab, Kurd, Assyrian, does not distinguish and kills everyone. Anyone who dares to say a word is imprisoned or tortured or killed. Syrians will not back down. The revolution will continue until we reach our goal of freedom and toppling this dictatorship and tyrant regime.
What makes me mad about what's going on in Syria? Well, obviously it makes me very mad that people, you know, just for the sake of asking for freedom, then they're getting literally slaughtered. You know, the women are getting raped, the children are being knifed, you know, and butchered in front of them. The men are being detained and tortured and killed in mass graves or whatnot. That makes me mad, but and then of course I feel very upset also also about how the world is just watching what's happening and nobody wants to do anything. I don't even know that the world is watching because nobody cares. You know, that's the sad part. You know, I don't know if it makes me more mad or more sad. You know, that something like this can be taking place just because people are asking for freedom, and that's all they're doing. You know, and they're being killed. We have 50,000 people killed. You know, in 2 years, and the world is watching. What are they waiting for? What can Americans do to help with what's happening in Syria right now, like regular Americans? Well, you know, you could have civil organizations come out, you know, rally, you know, say we want something to happen, we want more humanitarian aid to get into Syria, we want the US government and other governments around the world to show the Syrian government that they don't want to deal with them. I mean, money is still going back and forth into Syria with governments, and there's still some relations, you know. If the world government send a clear message to the government of Syria that they're not going to be dealing with them, not now and not in the future, then there would be no future, you know, for the Syrian government, and that would, you know, basically force them to step down. You know, the Syrian people, they want actually to get the weapons and to get, you know, the communication equipment and whatever is needed, you know, so that they have some fair chance of fighting against the Syrian government, you know. They don't necessarily want outside, you know, military to come inside, take over their country and then decide what's going to happen. You know, it didn't work in Iraq, and there's no I mean, there's nothing that says that's going to work in Syria. You know, I mean, you have a growing Free Syrian Army, you have an oppositional government, or, you know, the beginning of an oppositional government that's sitting and working outside of Syria and starting to get things together. So, you know, you want to empower these people and give them some real alternatives and ability to, you know, bring down the government. I mean, it's very fair to be gunned down with a machine gun if you're just standing there, you know, in a rally. Or to be attacked in the middle of the night and have your children killed, you know. I mean, there's nothing you can do. Or to be attacked from, you know, from the air with missiles and bombs and all. I mean, that's just, it's not fair play at all, you know. Syria wants to transition into a democratic country. You know, they don't want a tyrant family or government sitting, you know, a corrupt government. Everything has been corrupt in Syria for the last over 40 years. So that's what we want for Syria, for the transition to democracy to go easily, and for, you know, the Syrians to learn what democracy means, and, you know, for the future, you know, to be a democratic Syria.
Free, free Syria! Free, free Syria! Free, free Syria! Free, free Syria! Long live 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 Syria!
So why does it matter to me, or why do I care as a human being about what's happening in Syria? It's not just because I am Syrian. Because I'm Syrian, then I was initially touched by what's happening in Syria. But it's the whole humanitarian aspect of people asking for freedom. They're not asking for something that's not a basic human right. They're just asking for freedom. They don't have the freedom to go outside and speak or have free opinions even in their heads. Everything has been supervised like a big brother, you know. And it's so basic, and because of that, the government has been threatened so badly that they are just killing them and, you know, annihilating them basically. And I think every human being should care that somebody else does not have the right for freedom. You know, I mean, the Syrian people are not, it's not one religion, you know, it's a diverse community. We have, you know, few Jewish, Kurds, Druze, Christians and Muslims. All of these people together, they all want what we all should have and what everybody deserves, and that's freedom. And that's why we should all care, because it's a basic human right.
We will live free or die. This is the goal. We will live free. We will not die. Syria will not die. Syria will be free.